Great to see all of you. Yeah, happy Sunday. Last week, my lesson was titled The Importance of Being Disillusioned. If you weren't here last week, you missed some really good, interesting stuff. No. At least I thought so. And part of it really is about learning to let go a lot of our conceptions and beliefs and the ways we look at things, the way we perceive things. And I mentioned a book that I absolutely love that Ruth Porter suggested to me from Richard Bach called Hypnotizing Maria. And there's a wonderful, interesting example in this book about a hypnotist who hypnotizes the author and hypnotizes him and tells him that he's basically in a concrete room. And in this concrete room, there's no, he is in there, he walks in through the door, he's in the concrete room, it's like a cell, there's no, it's concrete all the way around. And then while he's in there, the door disappears. And he can't get out. And he's stuck in this concrete room. And he said that it was just as real as anything he'd ever experienced, and he was completely trapped. He couldn't get out. Yet he could still hear the hypnotist's voice. And the hypnotist was telling him to come out. And he couldn't. And he tried and tried and tried, and finally, he tried actually running into one of the walls to see if it would break down, and knocked him down and fell backward and fell on the floor. And then afterwards, he got up and he said, I need help. I can't get out. How am I going to get out of here? I can't get out of here. There's no way out. And finally, the hypnotist said, I'm going to come in there with you. And then I'm going to take your hand and I want you to go out with me. And we're going to walk out of this place. And so all of a sudden there was this guy who's the hypnotist on the stage inside the cell with him. And he's just amazed. How did this happen? How could he possibly, have? And he took his hand and he started walking, and the hypnotist walked through the wall. And just as he was going through it, he just felt this amazing fear that he wasn't going to be able to do it. But then he just kept going and was able to go through the wall. And next thing you know, he's back on the stage. And the audience is applauding and saying, yay, and they're laughing. And some of them came up to him afterwards and says, man, that was great. Did you really, when you fell like that, did you really think you were, and he said, what are you talking about? I ran into a wall. How many of you ever run into a wall before? Isn't it an amazing and a great metaphor for so many things that go on in our lives? How many walls do we have put up in our lives that we really believe and think are real, that we can't go through because they're real, aren't they? And I love that saying, Albert Einstein said that, reality is really an illusion, although a very persistent one. And it said this last week. It's like, but there are things that we have been taught to believe about ourselves, about our possibilities, and about our limitations. And we live within these walls sometimes. Gary Craig Gary Craig is the developer of the emotional freedom technique that I do. And one of the things he talks about is that we all get programmed by the writing on our walls. We live our lives and we see the world through the experience of all this writing on our walls that we've accepted in our lives. And so part of our waking up is to learn to look past and even erase some of the writing that we have on our walls. Last week I shared with you a wonderful contest that went on in Omni magazine. In Omni magazine they had this wonderful contest, and the contest was the results of a creative scientific theory contest. And I shared with you some of those creative scientific theories, and I want to share with you a couple of other ones that just really intrigued me. And here's one that says that the Earth may spin faster on its axis due to the deforestation, and just as figure skaters spins increases when their arms are brought in close to the body, cutting down all the trees may cause the planet to spin dangerously out of control. It's a good theory. And then there's another one here. These are some of the honorable mentions. No, the birds take off at sunrise, and on the opposite side of the world, they are landing at sunset, and this is what's causing the Earth to spin on its axis. And then here's a good one. The quantity of consonants in the English language is constant. It's omitted in one place, and then they turn up somewhere else. For example, when you're in Boston and you park your car and have a yard, all of those migrate down into Texas, and you wash your car, and you have Earl wells. All right, so maybe you Texans don't think that's funny. I don't know. The Bostonians thought it was funny, no? So, there's these amazing, wonderful theories. How many theories do you have about your life? How many theories do you have that you have said, this is the way it is? This is the way I am. This is the way the world is. Part of our waking up and part of our spiritual growth, I always felt like there's I read this somewhere and it just has really stuck with me, is that spiritual growth really is not about adding something on to who we are. It really is peeling off layers. And I always kind of felt like it's like peeling off layers of an onion. Sometimes you do have a lot of tears when you peel off a lot of these things that we think are the truth, that we think are real, that we think are the reality of who and what we are, or who and what the reality of the world is. There was vacationing in Arizona, there was a British tourist who he spots this cowboy as he's going by the side of the road and with his ear down to the ground. And he goes over and asks, he says, well, what's going on? And the guy says, well, 2 horses, 1 gray chestnut, they're pulling a wagon carrying 2 men. The cowboy says, and one's wearing a red shirt, the other one a black shirt. They're heading east. Wow, you can tell all that just by listening to the ground, one says. No, replied the cowboy, they just ran over me. Things are not always as they appear, are they? I think about all the assumptions that I've made in my life. Have you ever made an assumption? You guys ever know what I'm talking about? You know what assumptions are. I won't go into that, but you guys have heard that saying before. But, we make a lot of assumptions about ourselves, about each other, about our lives, about the world. And it's a part of our waking up, part of our spiritual growth, part of our becoming, quote, enlightened in life is beginning to recognize when we are making assumptions. And when we are identifying those assumptions as the truth. And what came to me in when I was reflecting on what I was going to talk on this week was we went from understanding that becoming disillusioned really was not so much a bad thing. It really is about letting go of our need for our illusions and learning to let go of our need to be disillusioned or to be in our illusions. And so what came to me is that we want to move from being disillusioned, which is valuable. It's important to let go of our illusions, but we want to move from that into a place of discernment. And there are ways for us to really pay attention and notice not only how to let go of some of the illusions that we have in life and the importance of that, but then also to be able to tune into how we can begin to look at and see things differently and see things in a way that we are seeing them more clearly and seeing more of both from a place of truth, but seeing the truth that we are seeing in the world. There was a story I came across and thinking about this, and there was a guy whose man wanted to impress some of his friends, and he wanted to impress them with his eye for art, and they were going to be taking a tour of an art museum. And as they were going through the art gallery, he had forgotten his glasses. And you know, the guy was really pretty nearsighted. He really couldn't see very well. And so, in fact, he hardly could see his hands out in front of him. And but, you know, he figured, you know, these guys, I mean, it's not a problem. I'll just, you know, I'll be able to just give an impression of what I see in the art, and it'll be just fine. So he goes over to this one frame, and he looks at it and goes, wow, why would anybody want to paint something hideously ugly like that? I mean, it's, you know, it's a true rendering of the object, but why waste time painting such a disgusting subject? And everyone was kind of laughing, and by this time his wife kind of leaned over and whispered in his ear and says, "Sweetheart, that's a mirror." I resemble that remark. Eric Butterworth says that we see the world not as it is. We see the world as we are. And one of the things that helps us to really begin to move through life in a way that allows us to peel back some of those layers of the onion in our own awareness and our consciousness is really recognizing that we're not seeing things as they are. We're seeing things as we are. And the more we can really wake up and pay attention to how that is showing up for us in life, how things that are going on out here are really a reflection of many of the things that are going on in here. We talk a lot in Unity about the law of attraction, and I'm going to suggest to you that there's another law, and that law is the law of the mirror. And the law of the mirror really is that what we're seeing out here in the world is really a reflection of what's going on in our own energy, in our own consciousness, in our own ways of looking at things, our own seeing and our own thinking processes, and our patterns, and the writing on our walls. And so part of our waking up is to recognize when we're looking out here that not only, that we're not just looking at something out here. What we're looking at is something that is coming from within here. We talked about this in our class yesterday on the shadow effect. And one of the things that we're talking about is the Bible beginning to recognize when we are projecting out into the world. And so much of our experiences in life that we are challenged by are really things that are coming from within our own thoughts and feelings and patterns, and that we're working on letting go of the ways we see things so that we can actually, things show up in our life and our world so that we can actually see what's going on in here so that we can actually then transform those energies and those ways of thinking and those ways of looking at things. And so they're there to help us to see things from a different perspective. When I was working on this, I heard a little voice inside. You know, sometimes in my meditation I hear these voices, and I listen to them and I kind of think, okay, well, what is that about? You know, and I hear sometimes things that seem to be very insightful in one place and then not so insightful in others. But I came across this, and I came across. How many of you ever heard of the unified field theory? You ever heard? You know what I'm talking about when physicists have really come into an understanding that really we are a part of this amazing oneness field of being. They call it unified field. You know, in Unity we call it unity. But they call it the unified field. And the unified field is really this idea, this understanding that ultimately we are all connected energetically. Well, I would suggest to you that's true, but we will use a different word. We call it spirit. Energy, spirit, and we're talking the same thing, but using different words to say the same thing. There really is only a oneness that we're all a part of. And we go through our lives thinking that we're these separate beings, and the reality is it's true. We are these separate beings that are also one with each other. And we have a tendency to think in either-ors. We're either separate or we're one. And I'm going to suggest to you that our larger awareness and a larger vision knows that both of those are true. Because we are actually individualized expressions of this one. Julie gave me this wonderful example that she did with some of her kids when she was doing the youth program some years ago. And one of the things that she had the kids do was take a piece of paper and she had them cut out a hole for each of their fingers and had them stick their fingers up through the holes of that piece of paper and look and say, can you see? We're all separate, aren't we? But when you look down below, we're all connected. We're all one. It's such a valuable image, I think, for us to recognize that on a powerful level, what we're looking at here are little fingers sticking up out of a piece of paper. And, you know, that's valuable. That's important. These fingers are all valuable and important. They all have a role to play, don't they? They're all important. You are an important finger in the hand of God. You know that? Do you realize how important you are? If you weren't here, how in the world, I mean, some of your thumbs, you're a thumb, and what would we do without that thumb? Boy, I'll tell you. I know. So we all have a role and a place and a thing that is important for us to be a part of, that we all have a unique ability to make a difference and to express more of that divine in the world. And all of that is a part of this wonderful connection that we're involved in, that we are connected to. So the unified field is, in that unified field, there's also a unifying force. And this is what came to me in my meditation also, that there's a unifying force within the unified field. What would you suspect that unifying force might be? And what came to me, of course, was that it's love. That ultimately love is what really does unify all of us, that brings us all together. That there really is an energy that attracts us to connect with each other and to recognize the connection that we already have and to be able to see that more clearly. And then there's also an important part of that. In order to be able to experience more of that unifying energy and that unified field, we need to develop a unified view or a unifying view. We need to begin to see things more clearly and to see things more through the eyes of that awareness, of that energy, of that consciousness, of our connection, of our oneness. Begin to see things through an awareness that there really is, as we talk about every Sunday, only one presence and one power. And begin to let go of the need to have exceptions to that. You know the exceptions, right? How many of you got, there's only one presence, one power, except, you know what we're talking about? I don't need to list them for you. You know the one. You know the exceptions that you have in your awareness. There's only one presence and one power except that guy over there, or that girl over there, or those people over there, the thems of the world. Do you know there are no thems? Yeah, there really are no thems. There are only us's. The other thing that we have a tendency to do sometimes is we have a tendency to believe that there's only one presence and one power except in, let's see, these physical bodies. Sometimes we don't really get. There's just as much God in every little cell of these physical beings as there is in the whole universe. And it's phenomenal. And it's amazing. And it has this amazing ability to thrive and to grow and to be healthy and whole. We sometimes don't think, one of our exceptions sometimes is money. There's only one presence and one power in the universe except in money. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Do we ever make exceptions when we think about our money, our finances? Yeah, I think we do sometimes. The reality is there really is only one presence and one power in all of it, in all of being. Just as the wave is a part of the ocean the ocean is a part of the wave. Just as a drop of water is just as much ocean as the whole of the ocean, the whole of the ocean is still within the drop of water. So part of our waking up and part of our moving from an awareness and a consciousness of letting go of some of the illusions we have of our separation, and letting go of some of the illusions that we have about our lack and some of the illusions we have about our health, some of the illusions we have about our disconnection in life. Part of our waking up process is moving into a place of being able to see things through a different eye, to see things a little differently, and to use our awareness in different ways. Stephen Covey tells in the 7 Habits for Highly Effective People a story of a man who was riding on a bus and was greatly disturbed by a young boy who was running up and down the aisle of the bus. He was screaming and laughing at the top of his lungs, and while the young boy's dad just sat there idly by, kind of in a daze. And the man, he just, he couldn't believe that this parent was allowing this child to just run wild, and thought it was just very rude and inconsiderate. He was being inconsiderate of all the other people there on the bus. And he began to notice the guy and notice how unflatteringly he looked. His hair was unkempt, and he was probably homeless, and his eyes were bloodshot, probably an alcoholic. Finally, he just couldn't take it anymore, and he got up and told told the man's dad, says, he just demanded that he get control of his child. And the dad seemed a bit shaken, and he said, from a kind of a trance state, kind of apologized and said, I'm really sorry that, you see, his mom, my wife, just died at the hospital this morning, and we've been there all night, and I was trying to think of a way to explain and tell my son. This story really touched me, because how often do we make those kind of judgments just instantaneously and not really thinking about where that other person might be in their life? How often do we use our views, our belief systems, our illusions, to not see the possibilities of what someone else might be going through? In the Course in Miracles, it says, wisdom is not judgment. It is the relinquishment of judgment. It's letting go of the need to be right. It's letting go of the need to see things in a way that keeps us separated, that keeps us blocked. Jesus said, you judge by human standards. This was in Luke. He says, you judge by human standards, and I pass judgment on no one. One of the illusions that we have in life also is an illusion that the world and the things in the world are our source. You know what I'm talking about? How many times do we place our faith in something out here when we really need to be putting our faith in something that really comes from within here? We tend to put our faith in sometimes our job. Sometimes we put as our security, as our source of our abundance. Sometimes we put our faith in our government to take care of things. Sometimes we put our faith in our partner for our source of our love, don't we? We think we have to have if they're not always being loving to us, sometimes we feel like we're not loved. Anybody ever felt that way? Of course. We all feel that way sometimes. Aren't we actually basically making that other person our God? The reality is there is no absence of love in us, in them, anywhere in our world, in our experiences. But if we look to those things out here to give us that, then we are misunderstanding and we are not seeing clearly. And then there's the other opportunity we have. You know, we do get a time when we actually do experience a need to ask for help. Anybody ever needed to ask for help? And we pray. And we pray and we began to see that things began to, unfold. And then, when things kind of get better, we go, okay, God, I got this. Sound familiar? So part of our learning to wake up and to discern is to begin to really always move back into that understanding. Always move back into that place of knowing that there really is only one source for our good. Now, there are lots of channels. This is where discernment really comes in, isn't it? Really, discernment is learning to distinguish the difference between a channel for our good and the source of our good. There are lots of channels. This church is one of the channels for our good, isn't it? Look around at the people around you. Look at these amazing, wonderful channels that we have of love, of appreciation, of acceptance, of joy, of celebration. It's just magnificent. They're wonderful. And we celebrate those. And we know that each one of those is an expression of that divine good. And yet we also know that not a one of these individuals is our source. They are reflections of our source. Wouldn't you agree? And so it's important for us to really begin to, be aware and to really practice this knowing that there really is only one presence and one power in the universe, and that presence and power is in the very essence of your being. It is the essence of who and what you are. It's in the essence of who and what you are created to be. And the more we can remind ourselves, when we find ourselves getting caught up in all of the anxieties and fears of life, anybody have any of those? We get ourselves caught up in the anxieties and fears. The moment you know that you're really looking for something out here as your source, is you've got anxiety and fear. Pretty good signal, isn't it? And the moment that we stop and say, God is my source. God is my source. There really is only one presence and one power, and God is my source. And when we catch ourselves and move back into that place, we know that we have moved out of making something out here our source and moved back into recognizing that there really is only one presence and power, and that's working in and through us right now, and really is working to bring about healing, working to bring about abundance, working to bring about spiritual awareness and understanding, working to bring about clarity and enlightenment, working to bring about love and connection. So ask yourself the question, what have I been making my source? What have I been making my source for love? What have I been making my source for my strength? What have I been making my source for my supply? What out here in the world have I been making the source of my health? What have I been making the source of my wisdom? Discernment is recognizing the difference between a channel and a source. In John 7:24, stop judging by appearances, but instead judge correctly. I want to share with you a story that I came across in closing. There was a seminary professor and his wife, and they were vacationing in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And one morning they were having breakfast, and they were in this little cafe restaurant, and they were just hoping to just enjoy a nice, quiet family breakfast, just the two of them. And they noticed that there was an elderly gentleman walking around at all the tables, and he was shaking hands with everybody and just being very friendly and very outgoing kind of guy. And the seminary professor kind of leans over his wife and just kind of says, well, I hope he doesn't come over here, But sure enough, he comes over and he's shaking his hands, and he asks the folks, well, how are y'all doing? And he said, well, we're doing good. And I said, where y'all from? We're from Oklahoma, and we're just traveling, you know. And he said, oh, well, welcome to Tennessee. I hope you're having a... And he says, well, what do you do? And he says, well, I'm a seminary teacher. Oh, you teach preachers how to preach. And he said, well, yeah, that's one of the things I do. And he said, well, that's wonderful. I've got a story for you. And he kind of goes, okay, another story. And so the man begins, and he tells his, he says, you see that mountain over there? Not far at the base of that mountain, there was this boy that was born, and he was born to an unwed mother. Now, back in those days, that was pretty bad thing considered, you know. That was, the culture didn't really accept that very well. And not far from the base of that mountain, there was they had a hard time. And the boy had a hard time growing up because every place that he went, people would say, and they would ask questions, well, who's your daddy? And he didn't know. And he couldn't answer the question. And after a while, he got to where he didn't want to go anywhere because he just didn't want to have anybody asking that question. And actually, some of the kids would tease him and say, well, who's your daddy? And he didn't know. And he didn't know. And so he got to where he really didn't want to be around anybody, and just didn't want to do that. But he did one time. He decided he was going to go to this church, and he went into the church, and he'd kind of hide in the back of the church a little bit. But in the church, one day the preacher, he tried to always sneak out before everybody was, before the crowd left. He would always try and leave before. But one day that the preacher did the benediction so quickly, he didn't get a chance to get out before everybody else did. And the preacher, he went out with everyone else, and he met the preacher at the door, and the preacher said, well, hello, young man, how are you? And he said, well, I'm fine, preacher, thank you for asking. And he said, well, who's your daddy? And everyone just kind of froze, and they kind of went and gasped a little bit and thought, oh. And the minister caught on pretty quick that there was something. He said, oh, I'm sorry, I recognize you. I know who you are. You're a child of God. You're a child of God. And that young boy lit up and said, oh, thank you. And then the man telling the story said to the seminary leader, the teacher, and his wife, he said, isn't that a wonderful story? And as he was walking away, and he says, if that preacher hadn't told me that so many years ago, I don't think I would have amounted to much anything. And he walked away. And the seminary leader just was stunned and just thought that was just a wonderful story, and asked the waiter to come over and says, could you tell me who that man was? And he says, oh yeah, everybody knows who that is. That's Ben Hooper. He's a former governor of the state of Tennessee. You and I have the opportunity and the ability to not to try and set things right in the world, but we have the opportunity and the ability to see things right and to see things rightly. There really is only one presence and one power in you and in you and in you and in you, in each of us. And the more we look for that, beyond all the other stuff that we tend to see, the more we become a part of bringing heaven to this earth. Thank you, because I know you do that. And God bless you. Let's move into our meditation time. All right, let's take a nice deep breath and move into a place of really expanding that feeling and that energy of gratitude. Just begin to relax. Let your eyes gently close. Begin to be open and receptive to allowing the amazing blessings of Spirit to come in and through our hearts, and be open to knowing and seeing through the eyes of the heart. Let yourself be filled with an awareness of the one presence and one power that is love. Let yourself be immersed in that energy, that feeling, that consciousness of connection to all things, to all beings, to all of being. And as you breathe in and out, give thanks that not only are you able to breathe in and out, but you are being breathed in and out. And that there is an energy of connection, of love, of significance, and of power, of strength, of understanding and wisdom within the very essence and core of your being. And take the opportunity now in the mind's eye to simply pull back the veils of illusions, of fear, the illusion of I can't, illusion of not possible, the illusion of what if, the illusion of if only, and allow the essence of that strength, of love, of peace, of oneness to radiate. Radiating from the heart center, from the very heart of the universe, beating in and through and as you, in a unique and special and individualized way. Give thanks. Take a nice deep breath now. Feel that awareness, that energy of gratitude filling you even more. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. And so it is. Amen.